The stars above the colony of New Appalachia had always been beautiful. But tonight they carried death among them, Commander. Lyra Vance stood on the porch of the colony administration building and watched the alien ships descend through the atmosphere like falling embers. She counted 12 of them, each one large enough to carry 1,000 soldiers. And she felt nothing but a cold calm settle into her bones. She had been a Marine for 20 years before she retired to this frontier world. And she had seen enough combat to know when a fight was coming. The colony had been established 60 years ago on the planet called Kepler 442b, a world rich in rare minerals that humanity needed for its expansion across the galaxy. 12,000 people called this place home, and not a single one of them was a soldier, at least. That was what the aliens believed. The transmission came through on all frequencies. A harsh voice speaking in translated English that carried the arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. Humans of this settlement, you are now subjects of the Velthari Dominion. Surrender your leaders and your resources, and you will be permitted to live as servants of our empire. Resist, and you will be erased from existence. Vance listened to the message 3 times before she walked inside to address her people. The town hall filled quickly. Farmers and miners and teachers and shopkeepers gathering with their families to hear what their commander had to say. She looked out at their faces and saw no panic, no tears, no desperation. She saw only the quiet patience of people who had grown up learning to wait for the perfect shot. You all heard the message, Vance said, her voice steady and clear. The Velthari Dominion wants us to kneel. They want our homes and our minds and our freedom. They think we are helpless civilians with no way to fight back. A ripple of dark laughter moved through the crowd. Old Thomas Crane, 71 years old and still sharp as a blade, stood up from his seat in the back row. He had been an Olympic biathlete in his youth, and even now his hands were steady enough to thread a needle at 500 meters. What do you need from us, Commander? He asked. Vance smiled, and it was not a kind smile. I need you to go home and get your rifles. I need you to remember every lesson your parents taught you and every hour you spent on the range. I need you to show these aliens what happens when they threaten the wrong colony. The crowd dispersed without another word, moving with purpose through the darkening streets. Within an hour, every household in New Appalachia had opened their gun safes and laid out their weapons for inspection. The Velthari had no idea what they had awakened. High Marshal Keth Vorn of the Velthari Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the human settlement through his viewing screen. It was a small place, barely worthy of his attention, but the minerals beneath the surface were valuable enough to justify the conquest. His species had subjugated 47 different civilizations across the galaxy, and not one of them had ever posed a real threat. The Velthari were taller than humans, stronger than humans, and their technology was centuries ahead of anything these primitives possessed. This would be easy. High Marshal, his aide said, approaching with a data tablet, we have completed our scan of the settlement. Population is approximately 12,000 with no military installations or defensive weapons detected. They appear to be simple miners and farmers. Keth Vorn made a sound of satisfaction deep in his throat. Excellent. Prepare my honor guard. I will accept their surrender in person. The shuttle descended through the night sky and landed in the center of the colony's main square. Keth Vorn emerged with 20 of his finest soldiers, each one armed with plasma rifles and protected by energy shields that could stop any conventional weapon. Commander Vance was waiting for him. She stood alone in the square, her hands empty and her posture relaxed. Behind her, the windows of every building were dark, but Keth Vorn could see faces watching from within. I am High Marshal Keth Vorn of the Velthari Dominion, he announced, his voice booming across the square. You will kneel before me and accept the mercy of our empire. Vance did not kneel. She looked up at the alien commander. studying his armored form with the same expression a hunter might use when examining a new species of prey. Her eyes moved across his soldiers, noting the gaps in their armor, the positions they had taken, the weapons they carried. "I am Commander Lyra Vance," she said, "and I have a counter-offer for you." Kethvorn felt something strange, an emotion he had not experienced in decades. It took him a moment to recognize it as uncertainty. "You are in no position to make offers." "Human." "I think I am," Vance replied. "You see, Marshal, your intelligence about this colony is incomplete. You know that we have no military garrison, and that is true. You know that we are civilians, and that is also true." She paused, and her smile grew wider. "What you do not know is that every civilian on this world can shoot the wings off a fly at 800 meters. What you do not know is that your soldiers are standing in the open while 300 rifles are aimed at them, from positions you cannot see. What you do not know is that if I give the word, not one of your guards will survive the next 10 seconds. Kethvorn looked around at the dark windows and the silent rooftops. He saw nothing, heard nothing, but something in the human's voice made his scales prickle with unease. "You are bluffing," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Vance asked. "Look at your soldiers, Marshal. Look at their faces. They can feel it too, can they not? That sensation of being watched, of being measured, of being found wanting?" She was right. His guards were shifting nervously, their eyes scanning the darkness for threats they could not locate. They were elite warriors who had never known fear. But something about this place, these people, made them feel like prey. "I will give you 1 day to reconsider your position," Vance said. "Take your soldiers back to your ships and think carefully about what you want to do next. Because I promise you, Marshal, if you choose war, you will learn why humanity has never been conquered." Kethvorn wanted to refuse, wanted to order his soldiers to seize this insolent human and make an example of her. But he looked into her eyes and saw something that stopped him cold. He saw absolute confidence, not arrogance, not bravado, but the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly how this fight would, and he retreated to his shuttle without another word. His mind churning with questions he could not answer as the shuttle rose into the sky. Vance turned to face the buildings around her. One by one, lights appeared in the windows, and she could see her people watching, waiting. Their rifles still in hand, she raised her communicator and sent a single message to Earth Command. They picked the wrong colony in the darkness of the hills surrounding the settlement. Jenny Whitmore lowered her rifle and smiled. She was 63 years old. Her hands were weathered from decades of kneading bread, and she had just spent the last hour keeping her crosshairs centered on the alien. Commander's left eye she had not been told to shoot. So she had not shot, but she had been ready. They all were. Marshal Kethvorn could not sleep. He stood in his private quarters aboard the flagship, staring at the data screen that displayed everything the Dominion knew about the species called humanity. The information was sparse, gathered from trading posts and diplomatic encounters at the edges of their space. Persistence predators, the entry read. Evolved on a high-gravity death world with extreme temperature variations. Remarkable endurance and adaptability. Average strength and speed compared to galactic standards. Threat level, moderate. Moderate, the word mocked him now, because the human commander had looked at him with the eyes of something far more dangerous than moderate. She had looked at him the way his ancestors once looked at the beasts they hunted on the plains of their homeworld. He pulled up additional files, searching for anything that might explain the strange confidence these humans displayed. He found records of their wars, conflicts that had raged across their planet for thousands of years, and he frowned at the casualty figures that seemed impossibly high. They fought each other? His aide asked, looking over his shoulder. With such ferocity? They nearly destroyed themselves multiple times, Kethvorn replied. And yet they survived. They always survived. He closed the files and made his decision. Send a patrol into the settlement. He ordered 20 soldiers, full combat gear. I want them to remind these humans of their place in the order of things. The patrol descended at dawn. 20 Valkyrie warriors marched through the streets of New Appalachia with their weapons drawn and their shields activated. They were the finest soldiers the Dominion had ever produced, veterans of a dozen conquests. And they moved with the arrogance of those who had never known defeat. The humans watched them pass. Farmers paused in their fields and leaned on their tools, their eyes tracking the alien soldiers with unsettling focus. Shopkeepers stood in their doorways with their arms crossed, not hiding, not fleeing, just watching. Children stopped their games and stared with curiosity rather than fear. Squad leader Vethener did not like it. Something is wrong, he said to his second-in-command. These people should be afraid. They should be running or hiding or begging for mercy. Perhaps they are too stupid to understand the danger. His companion suggested. Vinar shook his head. He had seen stupid species before, primitive creatures who did not comprehend what the Dominion represented. These humans were not stupid. They knew exactly what was happening, and they did not care. That was far more terrifying. The patrol continued through the settlement, making note of buildings and resources and defensive positions. Vethener filed his reports automatically, while his instincts screamed that something was very wrong then. Private Colran stumbled. He fell forward without warning, collapsing face first into the dirt street. Vethener rushed to his side and turned him over, expecting to find some medical emergency or equipment malfunction. Instead, he found a single small hole, no wider than a coin, had been punched through a gap in Colran's armor at the base of his neck. The wound was precise, surgical, placed exactly where the protective plating was weakest. Colran was dead before he hit the ground. There had been no sound. Vethener looked up at the hills surrounding the settlement, scanning for any sign of an enemy, but he saw nothing. The humans around him had not moved, had not reacted, as if a soldier dying in the street was nothing worth noticing. Contact. He screamed into his communicator. We are under attack. But there was no enemy to fight, no target to shoot at, no direction from which the attack had come. His soldiers formed a defensive circle and pointed their weapons at shadows while the humans continued to watch with those terrible patient eyes. Where did that come from? One of his soldiers demanded, "Who shot him?" An old woman stepped out of a nearby bakery, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. She looked at the dead soldier with mild interest, then looked up at the hills behind the town. Nice shot. Jenny, she called out to no one visible. Right through the neck gap. Vithner pointed his weapon at her. You, he snarled. Tell me who did this. Tell me where the sniper is hiding. The old woman laughed, a warm sound completely at odds with the situation. Sniper? She asked. Honey, that was Jenny Whitmore. She is 63 years old, and she makes the best sourdough bread on the colony. Her grandson Tommy could have made that shot blindfolded. And he's only 14. Vethan did not believe her. He demanded reinforcements. And High Marshal Kethvarn sent a full platoon of 50 soldiers to secure the area. They swept through the town with scanners and drones, and every piece of technology at their disposal. They found nothing, but they kept dying. A soldier walking near the edge of town fell with a hole through his eye. Another collapsed while standing guard, shot through the tiny gap where his helmet met his shoulder plate. A third was hit in the hand when he raised his weapon, the round passing through his palm and into his brain. 14 soldiers died before dawn, and not one of them saw their killer. The shots came from impossible distances, from angles that should have been blocked by buildings or terrain. With accuracy that bordered on supernatural, Thethovea demanded answers. He opened a communication channel to Commander Vance, his voice trembling with rage and confusion. 14 of my soldiers are dead, he said. You will tell me which human is responsible. Surrender your sniper, and I will be merciful to the rest of your people." Vance appeared on his screen, looking well-rested and faintly amused. "Sniper, Marshall?" she asked. "Which one are you asking about?" "Do not play games with me, human." "I am not playing games," Vance replied. "You have had 14 casualties, yes? That means 14 different shooters. Jenny Whitmore got the first one, as you know. Private Chun took the second, and he is a 19-year-old student who works part-time at the general store. The third was old Thomas Crane, and at 71 he is a bit slower than he used to be, but he still has not missed a shot in 30 years. She paused, letting the information sink in. "Shall I continue? I can name all 14 if you like. I can tell you their ages, their occupations, their average shooting scores from the last colony competition. I can tell you which of them has children and which of them has grandchildren. And I can promise you that every single one of those children and grandchildren can make the same shots their parents made." Kethvorin felt something cold settle into his chest. "That is impossible," he said. "No civilian population has that level of training. No species devotes such resources to teaching ordinary citizens to kill. No species except humanity." Vance replied. "You see, Marshall, you made an error when you researched our people. You looked at our military forces and our weapons technology and our defensive capabilities, and you concluded that we were a moderate threat." She leaned forward, and her eyes were hard as stone. "You forgot to look at our history. You forgot to ask why a species would spend 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing at distance. You forgot to wonder why our children learned to shoot before they learned to drive." The screen went dark, and Kethvorin was left alone with his thoughts outside his window. The colony of New Appalachia sat quiet and peaceful beneath the stars. 12,000 humans went about their daily lives, tending their farms and working their mines and teaching their children, and every single one of them was waiting, watching. Ready, the Marshal had come to conquer a colony of civilians. He was beginning to understand that he had walked into a colony of killers. I, Marshal Kethvorin, summoned his war council to the flagship's command center and ordered them to find answers. "I want to know everything about humanity," he said. "Their history, their culture, their psychology. I want to understand how a colony of farmers and bakers can kill my soldiers from distances that should be impossible." His science officers worked through the night, pulling data from every source they could find. They accessed human information networks and translated human texts and compiled a report that would change the way the Dominion viewed this seemingly unremarkable species. Forever Senior Science Officer Methra was the one who presented the findings, and her hands trembled as she spoke. "High Marshal, we have made a terrible miscalculation," she began. "We assumed that human weapon technology was limited and primitive. We assumed that their ranged weapons were simple tools used only by their military forces. Get to the point." Kethvorin growled. "Sir, humans invented a substance called gunpowder over 1,000 years ago. Since then, they have spent every generation improving their ability to kill each other from increasing distances. Their projectile weapons evolved from crude tubes that could barely hit targets at 100 meters to precision instruments capable of accurate fire at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. She pulled up an image on the display, showing a human competition where individuals lay on the ground and fired at distant targets. "This is what humans call sport shooting," Methra explained. "It is a recreational activity. They do this for entertainment. Parents teach their children these skills the way our species teaches mathematics or art." Kethvorin stared at the image without comprehension. "They shoot things for fun?" "Not just for fun, High Marshal. They compete. They hold contests to see who can hit the smallest target at the greatest distance. They award prizes and honors to those who excel. They have been doing this for centuries, She changed the display to show historical records from a place called Earth. The humans who founded this colony came from regions with particularly strong shooting cultures. There is a place called Texas where children learn to handle firearms almost as soon as they can walk. There is a region called Appalachia where marksmanship has been passed down through families for generations. There is a nation called Finland where shooting is considered a fundamental skill for survival. Mathra's voice grew quieter as she continued. "Hi, Marshall. Every human on this colony has been shooting since childhood. They practice constantly, competing against each other to improve their skills. Their annual marksmanship competition has categories for children as young as 8 years old. And the accuracy scores would qualify most of them for our special forces." Kethvorn turned to look out the viewport at the peaceful colony below. "How is this possible?" he asked. "Why would any species devote such effort to teaching civilians to kill?" "Because they remember," Mathra answered. "Their evolutionary history is one of constant threat. They were prey animals who learned to become predators. They developed endurance and patience and cunning because those who did not develop these traits were eaten." She pulled up one final image. An ancient human standing with a primitive weapon in a hostile landscape. They call themselves persistence predators. "Hi, Marshall." Their ancestors survived by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, and then they killed it with rocks and sharpened sticks. When they developed ranged weapons, they became unstoppable. They hunted their world's largest creatures to extinction. And then? Kethvorn asked, already knowing he would not like the answer, and then they hunted each other. The display filled with images of human conflict, war after war stretching back through millennia of bloodshed. The casualty figures were staggering, millions upon millions dead in conflicts that achieved nothing but the perfection of killing. They nearly destroyed themselves multiple times, Mathra said. They developed weapons capable of ending all life on their planet, and they came within moments of using them. But they survived. Hi, Marshall. They always survived, and every time they emerged from conflict, they were stronger and more skilled and more dangerous than before. Kethvorn dismissed his counsel and sat alone in the darkness of his command. Center, he understood now why the humans had looked at him without fear. They were not innocent civilians threatened by superior force. They were the descendants of a species that had spent 200,000 years learning to kill anything that threatened them, and he had threatened them. He opened a channel to the Dominion High Command and requested reinforcements. 10,000 soldiers, he said. I need 10,000 soldiers to secure a colony of 12,000 civilians. The response came quickly, filled with confusion and thinly veiled mockery. 10,000 soldiers for 12,000 farmers? Hi, Marshal? Are you feeling unwell? You do not understand, Kethvorn replied. These are not ordinary farmers. These are predators wearing the masks of civilians. Every single one of them can kill at distances our soldiers cannot comprehend. If we do not approach this with overwhelming force, we will be destroyed. There was a long pause before the response came. Very well, High Marshal. Your reinforcements will arrive within 3 days, but we expect results. The Dominion does not tolerate failure. Kethvorn ended the transmission and began planning his assault, but the humans had been planning. 2 Commander Vance had anticipated the orbital bombardment that would be the Valtyrie's first choice. Her people had spent decades digging deep into the mines beneath the colony, creating shelters that could withstand any attack from above. More importantly, they had laced the planet's crust with enough explosives to trigger catastrophic seismic activity. If they try to bomb us from orbit, we will crack this planet open, she told her people. Mutual destruction. They cannot win if winning means losing everything they came here to take. The colonists nodded and returned to their preparations. Weapons were cleaned and ammunition was counted. Shooting positions were established in the hills and the forests and the abandoned mine shafts. Children were sent to the deepest shelters while their parents stayed behind to fight old. Thomas Crane sat on his porch and sighted his rifle on a distant rock, adjusting for wind and temperature and the slight curve of the planet's surface. He was 71 years old, and he had been shooting since he was 5. My grandmother taught my mother. He said to no one in particular. And my mother taught me, and I taught my children, and they taught theirs. That is 7 generations of shooters, 7 generations of hunters, 7 generations of people who never forgot how to fight. He smiled, a cold expression that did not reach his eyes. The aliens think they are coming to conquer a colony. They are wrong. They are coming to a killing ground, and we have been preparing for this moment our entire lives. In the hills above the colony, 300 shooters settled into their positions and waited. They were farmers and miners and teachers and shopkeepers, grandparents and parents and children. All of them united by skills passed down through generations of survival. The Valkyrie reinforcements would arrive in 3 days. The humans would be ready. The reinforcements arrived on the 3rd day. 10,000 Valkyrie soldiers descending from the sky in waves of armored dropships. They spread across the landscape like a flood, surrounding the colony from every direction and cutting off any hope of escape high. Marshal Kethvorin watched from his command post and felt a grim satisfaction. "Let us see how confident these humans are now," he said. "Begin the assault." The first wave of soldiers advanced toward the settlement in perfect formation, their energy shields creating a wall of shimmering light that should have protected them from any attack. They moved with discipline and precision, exactly as they had been trained. The first soldier fell at exactly 800 meters from the colony. Perimeter he dropped without warning. A small hole punched through the narrow gap between his helmet and his shoulder plate. The shot had come from a hill nearly 2 kilometers away, fired by a woman named Sarah Chun, who had won the colony marksmanship competition for the last 12 years. Running, she was already moving to her next position before the soldier hit the ground. The Valkyrie formation scattered, soldiers diving for cover and returning fire toward the distant hills. Their plasma rifles sent bolts of superheated energy screaming across the landscape. But they were shooting at shadows. The humans were not there. They were everywhere else. Maria Santos, the colony's doctor, lay hidden in a camouflage position on a ridge overlooking the eastern approach. She sighted through her scope and found a Valkyrie officer directing his troops from behind a rock formation. The distance was 1,700 meters. And the wind was gusting at 15 kilometers per hour. She adjusted for both and squeezed the trigger. The officer fell, and his soldiers panicked. This was not the battle they had trained for. They had learned to fight against enemies who stood and faced them, who charged across open ground or defended fortified positions. They had never faced an enemy who struck from impossible distances and then vanished like smoke. The first day cost Guvorin 400 soldiers, sent scouts into the hills to find the human positions. But the scouts did not return. He sent drones to scan the terrain, but the drones were shot from the sky. He sent armored vehicles to provide mobile cover, but the humans had weapons that punched through armor as easily as flesh by the end of the 2nd day. He had lost 800 more. The humans melted into the wilderness like ghosts, appearing only to kill and then disappearing before retaliation could find them. They used the mines as highways, traveling underground between positions and emerging behind Valkyrie lines to strike at supply depots and command posts. Mueller twins, 14 years old and born in the deepest tunnels of the colony, led squads of soldiers into dead ends where shooters waited. They knew every passage and every chamber, and they used that knowledge to turn the mines into killing grounds. How are children doing this? A Valkyrie sergeant screamed into his communicator as his squad was cut down around him. Never received an answer, old Thomas Crane became a legend during those 72 hours. He established a position on a mountain ridge overlooking the main Belthery encampment and spent the first night picking off officers and communication specialists. His longest confirmed shot was 2,800 meters, delivered while lying in snow that should have frozen any normal creature to death. But Thomas was from Finland originally, and his ancestors had fought invaders in weather far worse than this when the Valkyrie finally located his position and sent a company to eliminate him. He simply put on his skis and glided to a new ridge where he continued his harvest. They cannot find me because I do not stay, he explained to the younger shooters who joined him. The aliens think of sniping as a military specialty, something trained soldiers do from fixed positions. They do not understand that for us, this is simply how we hunt. By the third day, Ketvarn had lost 3,000 soldiers, 3,000 elite warriors, the finest the Dominion had ever produced, killed by farmers and shopkeepers and children. His remaining forces were terrified, jumping at shadows and refusing to advance. Morale had collapsed completely. He gathered his surviving officers for a desperate council of war. We cannot win this fight, he admitted, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. Every tactic we try, they counter. Every position we take, they flank. Every soldier we send, they kill. We are not fighting an enemy. We are being hunted. Then we should withdraw, one officer suggested. Regroup and return with greater force. The High Command will not permit it, Kethvar replied. They will see it as failure, and failure is not tolerated. Then what do we do? Kethvarn was silent for a long moment. We request parley, he finally said. We speak with their commander and find terms that allow us to leave with some measure of honor intact. The message was sent, and Commander Vance agreed to meet. She chose the location herself, a clearing at the base of the hills where her people had done most of their killing. Kethvarn arrived with a small honor guard and found her waiting alone, except she was not alone as he approached. Figures emerged from the landscape around him, rising from hidden positions he had not detected. They were humans of every age, from gray-haired elders to teenagers, barely old enough to hold their weapons. There were hundreds of them, and every single one was armed with a rifle, and they were all smiling. Welcome, Marshal, Vance said. I believe you wanted to talk. Kethvarn looked at the faces around him and saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. These were not soldiers forced to fight. These were people who had chosen to defend their home, and they had enjoyed every moment of it. 3,000 of my soldiers are dead, he said, his voice hollow. Yes, Vance agreed, and not one of yours has seen the person who killed them. That must be frustrating. How is this possible? You are civilians. You are farmers and miners and shopkeepers. You should not be able to do this. Vance stepped closer, and her smile faded into something harder. We are all of those things, she said. We are also the children of a species that spent 200,000 years learning to survive. We are the descendants of people who walked across continents and hunted animals 10 times their size. We are the inheritors of every war and every conflict and every struggle that made humanity what it is. She gestured to the people around her. Every person you see here learned to shoot before they learned to read. They competed against each other for fun, constantly improving, constantly pushing the limits of what was possible. The worst shooter in this colony could outmatch the best marksman in your military. Jenny Whitmore, the baker, stepped forward and gave Kethvarn a friendly wave. She was 63 years old. Her hair was gray, and her hands were rough from decades of kneading bread. I got the first one, she said cheerfully. Did you like that shot? I was particularly proud of the angle. Not easy to hit that gap in your armor at 2,000 meters. Kethvarn stared at her and felt the last of his certainty crumble. He had come to conquer a colony of helpless civilians, had found a colony of apex predators who killed for sport. The sun was setting over New Appalachia, painting the sky in shades of orange and red as High Marshal Cathvoren faced his defeat. He stood in the clearing surrounded by hundreds of armed humans, each one watching him with that same quiet patience he had come to fear. Commander Vance waited before him, her rifle slung across her back, her posture relaxed but alert. "You have won," Cathvoren said, the words scraping against his pride like broken glass. "What are your terms?" Vance studied him for a long moment before she answered. "You will take your remaining soldiers and leave this system," she said. "You will mark human space as a no-conquest zone on all Dominion charts. You will ensure that no Velthari vessel enters our territory without explicit permission. In exchange, we will allow your survivors to depart unharmed." "That is all?" Cathvoren asked, surprised by the simplicity of her demands. "That is all. We do not want your technology or your resources or your submission. We want only to be left alone to live our lives in peace." She paused, and something flickered in her eyes that might have been compassion. "We are not conquerors, Marshal. We never have been. We fight only when we must, and we stop fighting the moment the threat is past. That is another thing your intelligence files failed to mention about humanity." Cathvoren nodded slowly, accepting the terms. But before he turned to leave, he found himself asking the question that had burned in his mind since this nightmare began. "Why?" he said. "You are not soldiers. You live peaceful lives on a quiet colony at the edge of civilized space. Why do your people cling to these weapons? Why do you teach this violence to your children?" Vance walked toward him, and the crowd of humans parted to let her pass. She stopped an arm's length away and looked up at him with eyes that held the weight of 200,000 years of survival. "Because we remember," she said softly. "Long ago, before we built cities and spaceships and colonies among the stars, we were prey. We lived in a world that wanted to eat us, surrounded by predators faster and stronger and more deadly than we would ever be." She reached out and touched the rifle on her back, her fingers tracing the warm wood of the stock. "We survived because we learned to bite back. We learned to strike from a distance, to kill before our enemies could reach us. We learned that patience and precision were worth more than strength and speed." Her voice grew harder, and we never forgot. Generation after generation, we passed those skills down to our children, not because we wanted to make them killers, but because we wanted to make them survivors. We taught them that the night still has teeth, even if those teeth have changed shape. She gestured to the people around her, the farmers and miners and teachers and shopkeepers who had just defeated an army. Every person here knows that peace is not guaranteed. They know that somewhere out there, something might come to take everything they love. So they practice and they prepare, and they make sure that when the threat arrives, they will be ready. Cathvoren looked at the humans surrounding him, seeing them truly for the first time. They were not monsters or savage warriors or bloodthirsty killers. They were simply people who had never allowed themselves to forget what it meant to be prey, and that memory had made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. "I understand," he said. Though he was not sure he truly did. "We will leave, and we will not return." He turned to go, but stopped when Vance called out to him. "One more thing. Marshal." He looked back. "The shooter who killed your first soldier, the baker, Jenny Whitmore. You asked if she was our best." Vance smiled, and it was not a cruel expression, just the quiet amusement of someone sharing a secret. "Jenny is good, Marshal. She is very good. But on this colony, she would rank somewhere in the top 2,000. There are grandmothers here who could outshoot her, and children who are catching up fast." She let that sink in before continuing. "The next time your Dominion considers threatening a human settlement, remember this. You did not face our military here. You faced our civilians. You faced our farmers and our shopkeepers and our retired school teachers. And they destroyed you." Her smile widened. "Imagine what would happen if you faced our actual soldiers." Kethvorin retreated to his shuttle without another word. The Valkyrie fleet departed that night, their ships climbing into the darkness and vanishing into the void between stars. True to his word, Kethvorin marked human space as forbidden territory, and the Dominion never again attempted to claim a human colony, but the story spread. Traders carried tales of the siege of New Appalachia to every corner of the galaxy. Diplomats whispered about the colony of civilian snipers who had humbled the mighty Valkyrie Dominion. Military strategists studied the battle and came away shaking their heads in disbelief within a decade. Humanity's reputation had transformed completely. They were no longer seen as a moderate threat, a young species with unremarkable abilities and primitive technology. They were seen as something far more terrifying, a civilization where every single individual was a potential warrior, where children learned to kill before they learned to read 50 years after the siege. A Valkyrie diplomat named Kethrin visited Earth as part of a cultural exchange program. Was the grandson of High Marshal Kethvorin, and he had grown up hearing stories of the colony that had broken his grandfather's army. He wanted to understand these strange beings who had earned such fear and respect throughout the galaxy. His human hosts took him to a place called a county fair, a celebration of rural culture and tradition. There were competitions for the best livestock and the finest produce, games and rides for children, and food stalls serving things Kethran could not identify. And there was a shooting range he watched in silence as human children, as young as 8 years old, took their places at the firing line. They held rifles nearly as tall as they were, weapons passed down through generations of their families. They aimed at targets hundreds of meters away, and they hit them. Every single time a little girl no older than 10 struck the center of a target at 300 meters, and her friends cheered and congratulated her. An elderly man in his 80s made the same shot with hands that should have been too weak to hold the weapon steady. A teenage boy hit 5 targets in rapid succession, adjusting for wind and distance with the casual ease of someone performing a task they had done 1,000 times before. They were laughing. They were treating this display of deadly precision as entertainment, as fun, as something to celebrate with their families on a pleasant afternoon. Garan returned to his quarters that night and composed a single message to the Dominion High Command. Recommend permanent non-aggression status with all human territories, he wrote. They are not a warrior species in the traditional sense. They maintain no vast standing armies, and they do not glorify military conquest. But they are something far more dangerous. He paused, remembering the children at the shooting range and their easy smiles. They are a species where everyone is a warrior. They have taken death and made it into a game they play for pleasure. Their children can strike targets at distances our sharpshooters cannot match, and they do this as recreation between sessions of schoolwork. He thought of his grandfather, the proud High Marshal who had never recovered from his defeat on New Appalachia. Kethvorin had died a broken figure, haunted by memories of an enemy he could never see and could never defeat. Do not threaten them, Kethrin concluded. Do not antagonize them. Do not give them any reason to turn their skills against us. Because if they decide we are prey, nothing in this galaxy will save us. He sent the message and turned off his display across the galaxy. In a small bakery on a colony world called New Appalachia, a 93-year-old woman named Jenny Whitmore was teaching her great-granddaughter how to adjust a rifle scope for long-distance shooting. Remember, Jenny said, her voice gentle but firm, patience is everything. Wait for a perfect moment, control your breathing, and never take a shot you are not certain you can make. The girl nodded seriously and practiced her breathing exercises outside. The stars shone bright and peaceful in the night sky, and humanity slept safely in the knowledge that they had never forgotten how to fight. The lesson of New Appalachia echoed through the centuries, passed from species to species, empire to empire. A simple warning that had saved countless lives. Never ask a human which one is the sniper. The answer will always terrify you.